enhance the possible potential positive impacts of migration. We know that there is a strong, this is a very important thing, a strong complementarity in the Mediterranean because both sides working together may be much more benefited than working alone, each one from each side. This is obviously, for example, with our closest neighbors, I don't know, Morocco, for example. Oh, it is obvious that, well, this is, for Morocco, this is where the investments come from Europe, or the tourists come from Europe, or this is where the workers migrate, this is from where remittances come, this is the destiny of still today. Endavant, sisplau. More than 60%. It used to be even higher. When we started the Barcelona process, exports, for example, from Morocco or Tunisia to the European Union was in the range of between 70 and 80%. And now it is only 60%, not because the exports have diminished, but because of the export to other areas have increased. And so relatively the percentage has been going down, but not in absolute terms. And so it is very important to see that this complementarity between north and south of the Mediterranean. And then there are so many things that can be done together. For example, I remember this is an important issue as well for this group of studies in the following years, the possible role of the binationals, people of family origin from the south who are living and working in the north, how they can promote exchanges between north and south of the Mediterranean. This is a very specific issue that resulted to be extremely important when we devoted to it some studies and seminars a few years back, and it continues to be so. And then, of course, there is the role of specific institutions. Well, we are just a studies institute, a think tank, so to say. But what it is important for us is that the studies that are conducted are or have to be policy-oriented, so that your work will be taken into account to produce policy recommendations, and then to mobilize not only governments but civil society, so that civil society helps us to bring about a better policy approach by the public institutions, be at the local, national, or European, or at the level of the Union for the Mediterranean as well, which try to help to fulfill their important goals for the progressive cohesion and integration in the Mediterranean area and development more equilibrated in the Mediterranean area. And so we have today, this evening here with us, of course, Professor Ricard Zapata Barrero. You know him very well because many of you come from the University at Pompeu Fraba. But what you may not know directly is that he's the director of this GRITIM UFF network for studies of the migrations. And then Professor Sari Hanafi, who is Professor of Sociology at the American University of Beirut and the President of the International Sociological Association, among many other things. And Professor Gerasimos Totstrapas, Professor of International Relations at the University of Glasgow and Editor-in-Chief of Migration Studies, that's published by Oxford University Press. So it is a very interesting occasion where you can get really into the thing with some of the most important people who have been working and publishing in this area. And so it is only my pleasure to be with you and give the word in the first place to Ricard Zapata, who will explain much better than me what all these things are about. Ricard.
Thank you, Selem Forenza, for giving me the floor and for this introductory remark. And I would like to start by sharing this emotional moment with you also. This event marks, as you say, the beginning of a collaboration with the IEMed in co-producing knowledge, with a shared belief that knowledge is a public good and that we need to go together. to offer grounded interpretation of Mediterranean and the diverse human mobility, both past and present, and then work together also on the memory of Mediterranean. Mobility is a distinctive feature of Mediterranean and what we makes them unique also as an identity. We are here to contribute to opening this common forum of interpretation of Mediterranean and migration issues with the support of the university and also IEMed, which is the platform of researchers working on this issue from all sides of the Mediterranean. We are joined by great colleagues from this event, including Gerasimos Tsourapas, who is also a member of IEMed, also, and Sadi Hanafi, a close colleague with one we share concern or commitment to producing and connecting knowledge, also to policy and social action, and I will say also political philosophy. We have a great talk together about great philosophers, contemporary and old one, and political philosophy. Let me also thank the presence of two contributors of Great in UPF, who are specially engaged as scholars to contribute to framing the counter-narratives on policy and social action related to migration in the Mediterranean. Lorenzo Gabrielli, who will be with us in a brief moment, and also Carmen Jeha from American University of Beirut, also, and who will share the insight with all of us. It is important to maintain also engagement and continue to process of building the Mediterranean region despite the geopolitical challenges that often undermines also previous effort. The situation maybe can be compared with the myth of Sisyphus. Existentialist philosopher use it in the myth. The gods punish Sisyphus by forcing him to roll an immense boulder up a hill, only for it to roll back down every time in nearer top, and repeating the action in the eternity. We are in this process, at least in the Mediterranean region building. Special mention goes also to the co-editor Ibrahim Awad from American University in El Cairo, who we had the great adventure to co-edit the book together, and apologize for being absent due also to other prior commitments. Let me frame the book and the effort we have put as a co-editor. One of the core ideas in editing the book was to consider migration as an entry point for discussing Mediterranean region construction. And thus, it is the result that what we can maybe speak about believers of Mediterranean. This volume is the result of 3 years of Jean Monnet Network project, European project, the main objective of which was to draw up the research agenda for the study of Mediterranean migrations. And thanks also to IMISCO, a regional collection, to accept the submitted book and provide also valuable support. It is the result of a collaborative research work that we initiate in Barcelona in 2018, also with the collaboration with IEMed during the 15th General Conference of IMISCO, where a number of scholars from all the ages of Mediterranean decided to join forces and create a platform to start a collaborative work together of reflexivity and positionality. Starting from the epistemological premises that we have to go beyond the Eurocentrism. Generalization and simplification, we're talking about migration, what we call also multi-perspectivism. The different contribution of this volume take a critical distant position from official state EU narrative and embrace multi-scale thinking. This is also a claim that knowledge production must be detached from the current domination of states on all its alliances, and that we need also to incorporate into the agenda perspective and visions of other scale, territorial and actors involved in migration dynamics and governance, southern and eastern visions of Mediterranean, the view of departure rather than arrivals of migrants. There are still in Muset and Marmar's Algerian contributors' terms too many black boxes that deserve our exploration and that claim data production. These multiple voices framework is an epistemological demand that any argument and research finding needs to be strongly connected with the history of migration and colonial past. Hence, a firm defense of the historicity of migration and how temporality is important also in Mediterranean migration research. The challenge that we all had was to include the Mediterranean as a category of analysis, or the Mediterranean scale of analysis within migration studies. This was our responsibility, I would say, in doing this book. The premise we all share is that there are a lot of research in the region, but probably less reflection on how this research could contribute to Mediterranean studies, and even the construction of a Mediterranean region. We already know that the specificity of Mediterranean is that it is a unique geographical space where 3 continents meet, but also the most turbulent and diasporic region, the least peaceful, and also by far the deadliest zone in the world. This broad geographical and geopolitical scope, coupled with cross-cutting and interdisciplinary contribution, as well as the key fact that this volume seeks to integrate regional, national, and northeastern-south complementarity, are the distinctive feature of its focus. This book contains 40 contributors and 25 chapters. It is a real community of researchers who seek to bring innovative perspectives and approaches with promising avenues for further research. It also seeks to bring together an existing community of scholars who are already contributing to the development of this field of research from all the shores of the Mediterranean. Another core principle followed in this book is the importance of decentralizing the research agenda, which should not be dependent on northern national interest. As I like to say, there is a philosophy behind this book that I call med-thinking. It is an epistemological claim that we really need to go beyond the narrative of crisis, and often unintentionally reproduced also by researchers. The violation of human rights and the use of legal resources by state to criminalize migrants and civil society organizations are only the crisis. And we also say that in the introduction of the book, the basic aim is to place Mediterranean migration studies within the global migration agenda by addressing a wide range of issues covering relevant areas and topics in 5 main parts. The first part is geopolitical migration, Mediterranean relations. The second part is governance, policies, and politics. Then taxonomies of motion and drivers as a third part. Cities, history, and social transformation, part 4. And, of course, economy and labor markets, and the part 5. What are the main research framework that link the different contributions? I will say that quickly reviewing images of Mediterranean migration in the last 5 years in Google Analytics, and even going through Google Scholar Analytics, we can infer several premises. The first one is negative aspect by far dominate the public representation and research narrative over the positive one, ruled by the same rhetoric most governments have constructed: crisis and instability, Mediterranean disordered migration. This may invite us to reflect to the extent to which the research agenda, which is too often conflict-driven, may fuel mainstream policies and hegemonic reactive governance narratives. This concurrency between the political, the media, and the social negative agenda is denounced by several contributors, directly by Awad from American University Al Cairo, contribution. In the case of French Euro-Mediterranean policy. And there is a general claim that for more encouraging and at least independent Mediterranean migration agenda from scholars. The second premise we can infer is that current Mediterranean migration research is also still too state-centric. dominated by national concern on border controls, national identity, social and sustainability, regional geopolitical consideration related to insecurity, ideological binomial between pros and cons. The leading argument here highlights that the dangers of hyper-crisis narrative can legitimize rapid, informal and flexible policy instruments and legislative proposals that are often at odds with democratic principles and fundamental rights. The crisis narrative simply creates a scenario of exceptionalism in border regimes, as Ferrer and Gabrieli show in examining in their chapter Evolution of Ceuta and Melilla, that may justify action beyond the usual social and political norms. It can also justify the lack of regular channels and even, in practice, hotspot systems, which are detention centers without regulation, jungle practices, and overall absence of humanitarian approach. In fact, what we learned from the different contributions is that migration cannot be the main object of crisis, but rather the political and moral crisis, and even the crisis of project of modernity, I will say in Sally terms, and the enlightenment vision of progress of humanity. The geographical European deterioration of problems creating a non-European emplacement in Turkey, Maghreb countries, is also a major trend visible in the first page of Google image research. This trend also a key message for researchers. There is a lot to do to reversing this trend dominated by politics and media. The various contributions of this volume certainly help to take a step forward in framing an independent research agenda for Mediterranean migrations. But we should also recognize that these contributions are in part Google-dependent, since they confirm that the link between Mediterranean and migration invite us necessarily to address border regimes and the relation between border, human in and mobility, and society politics, and about asymmetries of power, inequalities between different cardinal points. The Mediterranean as a geographical contact area between global north and global south is the clear scenario that divides us with new and unconstructed space of legality. The current Mediterranean scenario is more a geopolitical space for a chess game than human and intercultural area of mutual understanding. What are the main lines of research that intersect in the different contributions? The chapters also reveal how concepts shape representation and perspective, and how we classify them as a tool for analysis in political, social, and cultural trends. We have identified, and this is the conclusion of the book also, I invite you to go there, also at least seven main avenues for further research on migration. These avenues are not ranked, but are also start from the more general to narrow the zoom. The first one is the need to review traditional theories and explore new ones according to new trends and practices considering bad thinking lens. What becomes clear is that most theories that shed light on the Mediterranean migration patterns have been constructed without bad thinking provisos. Always from this point of view of country of reception, in terms of gains, benefits, political, what I call political solipsism and Eurocentrism. New mobility frameworks ignore the argument advanced by approaches such as dual labor market and world system theories, or review traditional migration and development debate, incorporating new recent discussion coming from business and migration studies, connecting migration, transnationalism, and entrepreneurship. The need to theorize black box situation, enhancing evidence-based research deficits, and avoiding blind shooting policies is also addressed by Musset and Marmar's exploration of irregular migration from North Africa to Europe. They even propose a global view, considering all the actors and new data methods to measure the process of irregular migrations into several steps, going from having a global stock of regular migration to how to measure statistics of the sea routes from countries of departure rather than arrival. and even how to have information of missing migrants. Again, viewed from the countries of departure and from the point of view of new immigration policy configuration, Buseta chapters also identify new migratory dynamics that request revision of diaspora theories informing policies in Morocco. The second point is the need to follow Mediterranean reading in methodological nationalism and adopt also multi-scale approach. Most contributions take the critical path towards states as the only legitimate actors in acknowledged production. These positionally take different forms of expression. For instance, Aborel contribution overviewing local and regional networks and their effect in Euromed cooperation. This current research avenue strengths challenge the limit of the multi-level governance and the absence of southern Mediterranean engagement. Fakouri and Atkins' Lebanese case, a study, also addressed this issue, wondering how notion of national identity and otherness materialize, interlace, and collide also in the Mediterranean. Finally, Boubrak's contributions from Tunisia deal with the issue on how the fact of southern countries are becoming countries of migration and may affect also political structure and division of competencies, contributing probably to a much more decentralized political regime. The determining place of historical argument in research Mediterranean migration is the third basic topic I have identified. The historical argument plays the leading role in this volume. The Mediterranean is a landscape of past and current treaties and geopolitical agreements that must be considered to understand whatever North-South relationship today. History also shed light to why it is difficult to reduce the asymmetrical power relation in the Mediterranean. This argument appeared in Ayoud's contribution from Egypt. History shaped the negative media and public opinion agenda and often explain the interlink with the political debate. The historical argument also shaped the focus of Rodriguez Peña analysis on the continuities and discontinuity of Spanish social transformation through migration. It also framed the world analysis of Marseille, conducted by Yvon Gasto from Nice. Exploring the impact of more than a decade of externalization of EU policy and geopolitical conditionality strategy is the fourth topic. Another research track framing the current research agenda is directly related to the impact of externalization on EU policies and the conditionality of Mediterranean countries. These are linked in this double EU morality of requesting more border control and human rights infringement with democratization and development narrative that frame both research and politics in Mediterranean region. For instance, Faustini's contribution directly criticized the EU journeys phase, narrative, and even averture also that the contrary is happening. Conditionality and EU external migration policies have a negative impact on democratization process in Morocco and even contribute to authoritarianism. Tunisia. Again, within this same research avenue, we can place Panebianco-Canata contribution on immobility partnerships. The democratic argument here continues to play also a vital role, but on a different complementary angle. They highlight how European neighborhood policies focusing on the case of mobility partnership in the southern neighborhood are in fact trade-off between cooperation and authoritarian governments to ensure stability and democracy promotion. The rural-urban nexus, often forgotten, is still also a framework explaining human mobility in 21st century. The traditional rural-urban geographical and socio-demographic frame has diverse functioning in understanding current new patterns in Mediterranean migration immobilities. For example, in a Tunisian case, Sobgat reminds us that internal urban frame explain most initial human mobility patterns today in Tunisia. This agricultural perspective is also present in Papadopoulos and Fratsea chapters on Greece, but differently. For them, there is a change of direction and urban-rural immobility is also becoming current trend in need of deep analysis. And we can even say, following the rationale, that rural and rural immobility from southern rural environment to northern rural environment is in need of more analysis. The sixth is the need to focus particular vulnerable migratory profile, as has been mentioned. Some particular profiles, such as women and young, are also addressed and invite us to pay more attention to their vulnerabilities. Ismaili Idrissi and Toto's chapters on mobility among marginalized youth in Morocco focus on how this particular profile of migrants construct their life, incorporating the will to migration as socialization process in Morocco. Following a similar rationale, Painter's contribution on gendered asylum in Black Mediterranean also illustrate the need to work particular profiles. In this case, intersectionality also plays a relevant role in fixing focus. Sex trafficking is the outcome also of border, gendered, and racialized policies. Finally, the need to reinterpret the Mediterranean in the light of migrations. Most contributions invite us to explore new ways of interpreting the Mediterranean as a space of interconnection through human mobilities. For instance, Carmen Lleja argues that the diaspora frames the Mediterranean as a symbolic and activist space of relations. The new space of interpretation also frames the contribution of Fakhouddin Atken from Lebanon, who suggests handling the Mediterranean through alternative space of hospitality, incorporating the activity of civic and humanitarian actors, refuting the conception of a clause excluding citizenship and linked to sectarianism. These new ways of interpreting the Mediterranean space drive also Fonseca's contribution. In this case, the focus points toward trans-Mediterranean digital space of communication, where time and space become unidimensional realities. Finally, we end this conclusion with a scientific disclaimer. Fragmentation of knowledge without accumulation of it prevents theory building and academic development in any study. In fact, this volume has made an effort in trying to take a step forward in improving research on Mediterranean migration by gathering in a single book the new trends of research agenda in Mediterranean migration. Of course, they are not exhaustive, but merely indicative on how much remains to be done to develop med-thinking in migration studies. I leave now the floor to colleagues, guided by the fact that speaking about the book is a good opportunity also to go in further the much-needed exercise of reflexivity and positionality that we want to promote. Thank you.
So thank you. So thank you very much, Professor Zapata. And now we have the pleasure to hear to Professor Sari Hanafi. As I said, he's Professor of Sociology at the American University of Beirut and President of the International Sociological Association, and among many other things, among which I would cite some recent books by him, for example, Addressing the Rupture Between the Religious and Social Sciences, or The Impossible Promise, Knowledge Production in the Arab World, or From Release and Works to Human Development, the UNRWA and Palestinian Refugees After 60 Years. Well, he's a fellow of the British Academy at the same time. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, President Florenza. Thank you, Ricardo Zapata, for the invitation. It was really a pleasure to be with you. He asked me almost 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago if I can participate, and I really enjoy reading the book. I mean, I have a short time to do it, and and I think there is amazing innovation in this book. Let me say that the premises of migration in the Mediterranean, to say that Mediterranean and migration are probably two sides of the same coins is really so powerful a statement. And I would say the book that influenced me much in all my professional and intellectual trajectory is the book of Brodel, La Méditerranée à l'époque de Philippe II, where I was amazed to see how much there is historical depth in the exchange, really a kind of a social space and sociological meaning. I mean, so much of exchange, philosophical exchange, trading, and so on. So, so I think what you have done on all these beautiful chapters is really to reiterate that there is a very deep, longue durée relationship that go beyond all this, if you like, what negative feeling, Islamophobia, xenophobia, we find concerning the question of migration. And somehow I would summarize this book in a book, in a word that you don't find it much in literature, is it's not xenophobia, but xenophilia. I mean, loving the other, and specifically, I felt this with the chapter of my dear friend Carmen Jeha, for instance, about the activists, how when they have felt this burnout in Lebanon, and I fully understand what she wrote. I mean, I really, it was a very emotional to read your chapter, Carmen, because I was also in the history in the making in Lebanon in that time, and how suddenly and how these activists, they want to continue to be activists, but they cannot physically do it there. So how they found this hospitable Mediterranean space. But what struck me more on Carmen Jeha chapter is a place of Istanbul. Istanbul become really this cosmopolitan place, no need for Schengen visa, etc. I mean, again, this is materiality is so important in this regard. And I know about Greece, for instance. Greece is a new space of extension of, if you like, a cosmopolitan scholar and activist who operate from Athena, wanted not to be far from the Arab region. So let me first decenter. Nevertheless, I want to decenter the Mediterranean and to say that there is something new worldwide concerning the question of migration. First of all, it's interesting that we coined the 20th century as a century of refugees. And of course, thinking particularly about the Second World War, I think the IOM who labeled this century in the 60s like this. Antonio Guterres find him actually as a UN Higher Commissioner for Refugees. It's not as a General Secretary of UN. Once he, in one of his speeches, talked about the 21st century is one of the global conflict and the humanitarian, and the human displacement. So what is the difference between refugees and displacement? Actually, the big, huge elephant today is the disaster and the environmental disaster versus conflict-induced cause of migration and refugees. And I did a figure. So I look from 2008 to 2022 to find that almost we have a double figure of those who migrate because of environmental disaster than because of violence and conflict. So now this is a new fact that really impose on us to think about the rooted causes of migration. And this is something dear to many chapters in your book, to say migration, you address it by looking to the rooted causes. So just to remind you, the figure of 2022, we have 79 million refugees worldwide, 50% increase from the previous year. So very alarming. 74% of refugees come from the Arab region. And here the centrality of the Mediterranean come. 21 million displaced people in the Arab world, a number that rises to 54 millions when including economic migrants. So all this is need to be factored in addition to 15 million stateless people also in the region. Needless to say, and I grew up in Syria, so Syria is the tragedy of the last decade, with now 13 millions need humanitarian assistance, and 5.6 millions are in neighboring country. Also something to think about it, that 25,000 people died in the Mediterranean Sea from 2014 to 2022. So it's actually the number is bigger if you take into account the missing 32,000 totally missing in the sea. So I would say really this is migration become a kind in Marcel Mauss conception, a total social phenomenon. I mean a total social fact. Sorry. So impacting all other spheres of life. Now, if I would like to talk a few minutes in a specific chapters. So for me, what really common of all these these chapters is bringing positive aspect of migration, if you like, to compensate all the terrible focus on negative one, but also the comparative perspective. I mean that of many chapters, and something, and of course in 2 or 3 chapters it was a comparison with the Ukrainian. Say, look, Europe, how Europe receive Ukrainians compared to receiving Syrians and Afghans. Well, of course, if we take into account that it should be a minimum standard of treating human. I mean, this is absolutely self-evidence. However, I often defend. I mean, in the Arab world, for instance, you have so much writing about saying this. Look to this European hypocrisy. Look, etc. And I was really cautious to use this sweeping criticism, because I do believe that solidarity operate in a different levels, from family level, and what Ibn Khaldun called the asabiyya, tribal asabiyya, but also in a national level, in a religious level, but then in a cosmopolitan level. But we should admit that most of the solidarity didn't reach this highest level. So we should admit sociologically that cultural affinities between Ukrainians and Polish and the others, I mean, make this hospitality much bigger. So not really to, and of course, if we accept this, we should also accept that for instance, Muslims in France, they have also a cultural affinity to some political imaginary of Islamic or Muslim Ummah, etc. And this is not in contradiction with allegiance to the nation states. So you need to do this reasoning for both sides. The other article, I think it was important, of Stefania Benibianco and Kanata, about the immobility or mobility partnership limit to EU democracy promotion through mobility in the Mediterranean. And I think really you find in other chapters this to say relationship between Europe and the authoritarian state of southern Mediterranean. I mean, whether the migration can facilitate also promotion democracy. I think we have much evidence that the EU aware of a kind of a relationship, but it's funny enough that there is a limit of this of how they go in parallel. I mean, thinking about promotion of democracy to and then giving a quota of migration. In this chapter, for instance, they show us the figure, in figure 5.2, the aid to the three countries, Jordan, Tunisia, and Morocco. And the aid to this from 2011 to 2019, you have this figure. When you looked at the figure, is very tiny. It's really, I mean, if you look any transition to democracy, Eastern Europe, Latin America, Europe post Second World War, the Marshall Plan and the investment to accompany this turbulent time is a huge compared to, I would say, really small peanuts European to country of Tunisia, for instance, where Tunisia, it was our proud, we Democrat in the Arab world, that it was a real transition. And we see very clearly in the time where you have a Nahda, one of the leading party of governance, where the funding dropped. So actually, you see that Europe is not promoting democracy, promoting a specific democratic elite that we like. So I think this was not clear in. Actually, it's not mentioned in this article, and I think it is important. And generally speaking, if I didn't do search in the article about Islamophobia, but I think it's not much talk about Yeah, Istanbul. Well, I am so tired of
Yeah.
of this. I am so I look at it
This is a bit
positively, if you
intentional,
like.
yeah.
But at least we need a little bit to account for.
Yeah.
This will. I move to the other chapter of Maysa Ayoub.
Everybody's
It's a very interesting chapter looking to newspaper, parliamentary minutes, and polls, public opinion polls about migration. And she noticed they converge, if you like, converge with a kind of anti-migration, if you like, policy and sentiment in France in this famous decenny of 2011 until 2022. However, I think I regret in her article she didn't tell us who lead this negative sentiment. Is it the media or the politicians? And what is the role of academia? And Professor Floranza, you talk about the importance of doing policy research, and I fully agree with you about this mission. So where is the role of academia? So I did 5 years ago analysis. I did analysis of migration studies articles about how they in 3 European countries, among them France, and I was very surprised how scholarly community is really normatively, if you like, push for hospitality of refugees and migrants. So how come the media in France is so bleak against migrants? Simply, you have a fringe of scholars that their scholarship resonate with the media, that they always invited. For instance, in France, I was recently in France in the time where they voted the law 1 month ago, and it was clear. I mean, all those who are specialized in Islam and Islamophobic, Gilles Kepel, Florence Berger, and so on. So really, they select a specific scholarship to expose it, and here it's really problematic. Again, I will finish by if you like, say that something I expected as a book about migration and Mediterranean, that I mean there is something new in the Mediterranean, that how this time is that not the Mediterranean as a country surrounded a sea, but the sea itself as a new geopolitical space of solidarity. And I am thinking how in the Mediterranean become all this subversion against the sovereignty. Flotilla going to Gaza, the amazing activists in the Mediterranean helping migrants not to be drawn. So, and this is despite the sovereignty of Italy, Spain, etc. So I would say it's really very interesting, and I invite you to read the work of Nicola Kosmatopoulos, a dear friend, Greek. For him, borders are not anymore separating two sovereign states, but a salient gap of turquoise sovereignties in which solidarities group and politics have occupied I think, if you like, Ricardo, in your last chapter, when you say the owner of this book, that its researcher did a hybrid research.
Yeah.
Description, explaining with some normativity. And I
Yeah.
would say you honor this book really
This
about
is
this.
awesome.
And this is why I mentioned this question of C. I stop here.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. And now we turn so to Professor Gerasimos Tsourapas. He is a professor of international relations, as I said, at the University of Glasgow, and he's the editor-in-chief of migration studies at Oxford University Place. Among many other merits and works he's conducting, he's created, for example, an Hellenic Observatory of the London School of Economics and Political Science, and so many other things. So please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, President Flores, and thank you, of course, Professor Zapata. Does this work?
That's working.
For the very, very kind invitation, and thank you to all of you for sacrificing your Tuesday afternoons to sit here and listen to us talk about migration in the Mediterranean. I'll try to not take all 20 minutes and try to keep this as interesting as possible. I'm really happy and honored to be here. This volume is the direct result of a wonderful network that Ricard created called Euromed MIG that you can still Google and find out more about. So I'm happy about this. I'm also happy that you embedded this in the IMISCO series. IMISCO is the European Organization for Migration Scholarship. Traditionally, it has been very Europe-centered, and Ricard's attempts to shift things a bit, to take a look at the southern Mediterranean, the eastern Mediterranean, I think is critical. So it's part of the effort that we're doing to, decolonizing to avoid the cliche, I suppose, but to push knowledge production a bit away from the center into other parts of the world. So I'm really happy about this. Professor Hanafi talked about specific chapters, so I'll just talk a bit briefly about a couple of main ideas and leave a couple of questions for Ricard, if I may, if he wants to respond or not. You should know that if we haven't convinced you already, you can download this. It's open access. Nobody has mentioned this, but it is freely downloadable as a PDF. So if this has proved fascinating, somehow look it up and download it. All 300 pages of this, I think, Ricard.
By chapter
400.
400.
420, yeah.
So it's going to take a bit of time to download, I suppose. What is this book about, right? So you've heard a couple of people. Essentially, if I can boil down these 400 pages into a single sentence somehow, Ricard comes in and tells us that, well, there's two fields of study here. One is Mediterranean studies, and one is migration studies in the literature. And they have been going in parallel, and they're not really talking to one another, right? So migration scholars say something about the Mediterranean, Mediterranean scholars say something about migration, but there's really not a lot of time or energy or willingness for them to actually get into discussion. So what these 20-something chapters?
24, I
24.
think so. Yeah,
24.
if I remember.
So what these 24 chapters do is engage with this wonderful concept that Ricard and Ibrahim have put together, which is called the Mediterranean Migration Studies field. So they come in and say, well, let's combine them, and let's look at how this new term, Mediterranean Migration Studies, is a way of looking at these wonderful commonalities across history, economics, across culture, that link the countries of the northern and southern and eastern Mediterranean together, right? And in many ways also link to migration movements that I would say predate the way that the Mediterranean looks today, right? Going back to colonial times or even further. So this is something that I find particularly striking and impressive. What they say is that we need a longer temporal and spatial continuum to understand migration in this region. And that's wonderful. I'm a scholar of international relations, and I find this always particularly tricky when I try to do research on the Mediterranean, because always we're expected to have a center kind of focal point, a point of reference. And usually, as the book mentions, it has been Europe. So it's always Europe looking at the Middle East, Europe looking at the Mediterranean. So it's always us against them. They're coming here. It's always immigration, borders, securitization, integration, if you want, all these kinds of things. There's another smaller literature that takes a very interesting look at placing the focal point in the Middle East and looks at people being sent, people going abroad. So Europe from the perspective of the Middle East, sending people and how they're treated there and so on and so forth. And if I understand the book correctly, is that both of these points of reference have problems, right? Why do we need a point of reference that's stationed either in Europe or the Middle East? And here's where the Mediterranean comes in as a new way forward that tries to take everything into account. And I find this kind of emphasis on interconnectedness and interdependence really striking, right? A couple of things, and then I'll get to the tough question for you, Ricard. One thing that I particularly loved is the fact that if we move everything aside and focus on the Mediterranean as a point of analysis or as a system of reference, we do away with all these hierarchies and structures and differences and power relations, I think, that are intrinsic in categorizations. That's academic speak, but what do I mean in practice? Staff on migration studies today, there is this categories of countries of origin and countries of destination, right? If you try to understand politics, that's one way to do it. Well, what the book says and what has been said often is that, well, that's a false dichotomy, right? No country is a country of destination, no country is a country of origin. Most countries are countries of origin, transit, and destination. So that's a very kind of problematic dichotomy. But at a deeper level, what's interesting here is the power relations that are hidden in these categories, right? My first book was on emigration in Egypt, so I'm well aware of this. But when you talk about countries of origin, or sending states, as some people call them, the underlying assumption is that, well, they're poorer, right? They're weaker, they're less developed. They want to send people rather than keep them. They have problems, right? They look up to these countries of destination that are richer, more developed, more powerful, all of these things. And what this book, by using the Mediterranean as a focal point, does is it debunks this, I think, right? In part of my research, I said I did a bit of work on Egypt, Jordan, and the Maghreb. One of the things I found after 2011 is that ostensibly weaker states are really able to use migration in order to put pressure on stronger states. So we see it in Jordan or Libya in 2012, 2013, during the time of Morsi in Egypt. Weaker states were able to use migration and put pressure on the Morsi regime to change its policies, right? Why would that happen? Well, it happens, but if you stop kind of paying attention to these categories that we've constructed here in the West, it's a bit more logical. Another thing that the book really does very well is to take this other dichotomy that I'm guilty of reproducing in my work, but that's a different discussion for my sins, the global north versus global south, right? One of the things that we've been doing in migration over the past few years is talk about the global south. And a lot of us, myself included, are doing it with good intentions. We want to bring these countries into the forefront. We want to talk about people and issues that are not part of Eurocentric kind of understandings. And yet, in doing so, if we succeed in doing so, we produce this category of the global south that brings together, I don't know how many dozens of countries, and ends up saying at the same time everything and nothing, right? So the global south as a category is something that needs to be critiqued. And Mediterranean migration studies does this. I'm Greek originally. Part of my research looks at Greek migration, and one of the things I was looking at is the migration policy of Greece under Syriza, the left-wing party during the Syrian refugee crisis. And one of the things that the Syriza party did is that, well, it tried to use Greece's position as a host state for Syrian refugees to put pressure on Brussels. And there were politicians that said, well, unless you give us more money and help us with the debt crisis, we have no option of opening up the borders, sending people through the Balkan corridor to Central Europe and Western Europe and the like. Now, that's interesting for a number of reasons, because I'm a bit of a geek in terms of this. What's interesting here in terms of this global north, global south dichotomy is that, well, this kind of strategy is not really a global north strategy, right? You wouldn't think a global north state would say, we need money, otherwise we'll open up the border, right? That's more something we associate or problematically associate with countries in the global south.
And actually, we don't talk much about this compared to Turkey. I mean, we criticize so much Turkey.
Oh, indeed.
Yeah,
Yes. So Turkey becomes this kind of like black sheep in this, whereas countries in the global north, member states of the European Union, advanced democracies also try to do this. So that's another thing I like about this book, that it shows how a lot of global northern countries tend to behave as global south countries and vice versa. A lot of countries in the global south tend to have global north characteristics. I mean, the Gulf. I mean, that's a different discussion altogether. I'm taking too long. Question for you. Ricard, one of the things I'm wondering in terms of this book is how is it embedded in the evolution of the field, right? I said at the beginning there are two fields, one migration, one Mediterranean studies, and Ricard says let's bring them together. Why do you do this? Do you do this as a logical continuation of debates that have been going on in these two fields? So the need to bring the global south in, the need to decolonize and bring in other methodologies, the need to broaden kind of interregional research. So do you build on the stuff that we've been trying to do in the past few years? So is this book the next logical step, or is it more radical? Is it a corrective? Is it something that says, well, you guys have not been looking at this, and this is what we need to talk about. Take it away from securitization, state-centered narratives, dehumanization of migrants, put human rights back in the focus, right? Put international law. So I'm curious whether this book is kind of taking a step forward or taking a radical shift, right? And a last point, and I'll stop here, has to do with the last few sentences in your book, right? You say, much remains to be done to develop med thinking in migration studies, right? And I'll try to be a bit provocative, right? Is it actually possible to talk about med thinking in migration studies? Even for all of you that don't really care about migration, is it possible to construct a framework where countries of the European South and North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean come together and cooperate? When I first came across the book, what I was...
International relation reflection.
I'm an IR person, so that's... I mean, one of the things we have to deal with is funding for research, right? Scholarships, research grants.
We are all dependent of funding.
all of these things come from governments or from the European Union, essentially. And typically, these funds come with recommendations on what to study, right? A scholarship to study X, a grant to look at this. And the European Union is quite good at doing this. So would the European Union ever say, well, here's 200 million for people to study med thinking, right? Or Mediterranean migration studies? I think I'm cautious because it reminds me of an earlier time, what President Florenza was talking about in terms of the Union for the Mediterranean, all these kinds of things that were before 2015, 2016, definitely, but even before 2011, right? Where countries of Europe and countries of the Arab world came together to talk about integration, cooperation, management of common challenges, and so on. Is that still possible today, right? When we have xenophobia, racism, far-right discourses, where migrants and refugees are used as instruments by Egypt, by Libya, by Jordan, by Lebanon, where you actually create migration crises, right? In the case of Turkey, in the case of Morocco, and others, right? You say it yourself, the current Mediterranean scenario is more a geopolitical space for a chess game, which I find really, really cynical and amazing. So my last thought is this: to what extent is the strengthening of Mediterranean migration studies possible, right? Can we take it forward? Does it have enough power to critique power, to identify inequality, to the abuse of power, the weaponization of migration? Or is it a counter-hegemonic project in kind of like Gramscian terms? That, well, we can use this with this framework to talk about things as they should be, not as they are. So I'm curious to hear your response, and thank you very much for that.
So I will invite Professor Zapata to answer to all these questions, but that will be in the form of the next roundtable, because you both are participants in this roundtable, and so I invite Gemma Borell and Carmen Queja and Lorenzo Gabrielli to come up and continue the talk.
There is another one.
You stay here because you.
No, we stay there. No?
Okay.
I don't know. Ah, bueno.
Like this, you can reply to them. Yeah, no, you can. It's better.
Si yo me quedo aquí. Bueno. Thank you for the question. Provocative. But you are totally right. I'm not happy with the global south and global north categorization.
We should have,
I am not happy with that also.
Well, podés decir cuando quiera
¿Pero qué?
yo
¿Quién coordina? Tú te...
yo me coordino, yo coordino y te doy la palabra a ti para hablar. Sí, per contestation, sí. Well, I'm so sorry. When we imagine this session, we can foresee a half of, a half a journey, a seminar during one day. It should be a very nice way to debate and to put on the correct way all this work that we have been, what we are presenting now today. But we don't have time, and we think a little bit in a mix of presentations. So I think a lot of things have been said about this book, and we can just take in this as food for thought for our work that starts now today, or now after the publication of the book. So I think we have been lucky to count on these two very important regards on the book, from the sociology, from the international relations, that provides you an idea about what is this book about. So it's a complex work, and mixing, as you say, Mediterranean and migration is exactly the work that pretends to do the book. And it's not an accomplished work, it's just a way to mix both things. That is something that Ricard, and this is why the IEMed is collaborating a lot on this, because what does it mean Mediterranean in research? It's our big question mark. You have Euromed, you have MENA approaches, you have North-South, you have Arab realities also in research, but what does it mean Mediterranean in all this? And I think you provide all these insights, but this will be another debate and another thing that for sure make us working in this nice work. But now we have the possibility to count with the participation of three of the authors, including
She's
myself.
author also.
Yes, me, I'm also author, even if you didn't refer this when you present. I'm
That's true,
also
that's true.
member of the Greeting Research team. But today, much more, and my role here at the IEMed, where we are pleased with Javier Agay always to collaborate with Greeting in this research Mediterranean. So now, no worries. We will now just open a presentation in a dynamic way, and I'm sure, because I know very well Lorenzo and Carmen, you know both of them, senior researchers in Greeting, two persons who have been amazing work in the migration studies, Lorenzo also, he's joint professor at the Political Science Department in the UPF and also associate research in the Science Po in Bordeaux, but also he is a person who we can say it's one of the persons who you can trust when you research something about migration, because it's a long research period. Even you have been working here at this house, no? So you know everything. It's signed. So, and we have Carmen Gea. We are very lucky to have Carmen here in Barcelona, and we are Barcelona, by the way, a kind of sort of island for this diaspora, or for this I don't know how you refer to, but this free space to capitalize and to work on this activism. We work a lot on this sense, and I think Barcelona became, in the sense of cities that always Ricard is pushing for this. I think Barcelona start to be a point on this regard. Perhaps not as Istanbul in the same sense, but we can work on this activism in Barcelona. So Carmen is here, an activist research in Barcelona with a Maria Zambrano scholar, also senior member of GRITIM. That is the big work of Ricard that have all this great research with him. And his lecture on the master, also on migration. But she's also specialized in gender. We work a lot on this, and in refugee and social movements. So you can imagine we have here these two persons in order to enlighten a little bit the situation or the added value of this book. I think everything has been done, but for me, the experience of this book is just that I feel free in the book. So it's something that what do you want to talk about research, about what? I say, well, I'm now at that time working at the Catalan government. I'm seeing, Ricard, a lot of things, networking. Try to understand why networking is so important. Governance, try to put a little bit of effort to understand why governance and networking. I don't know, I don't find reference, theoretical, or don't worry, Gemma, starting from your experience and go ahead with the research. Who can ask you this? Usually you are in the academia on this point of view, putting there all the effort, and I think he provides us the opportunity to go for new concepts. In my case, it was multi-level governance, the role of local and regional authorities in externality of policy, of migration policy, something that, and it appears that I can do this research because his encouragement in making this methodology working, in just to say at the end of the day that, well, a lot of work to be done in this regard, but to put new actors on the plate and to research on new movements and new governance approaches. So to feel this freedom, for me, it has been the most interesting thing of the book. And I want to put this into relevance because if you read all the articles, you will feel this, this idea that everything is possible in the research. What is a principle that it's not the principle of the research in the academic sense of extremely, strict academic sense of this. So for young researchers, for us in the IEMed, we are working so hard on this with our academic cooperation between universities and our research support. We are looking for this Mediterranean research ecosystem. And we need young researchers ready to open mind and look at the things in another way. And this is difficult if you don't have this space. So Ricard provides this first space in this book. And I think this book will be a reference, and everything has been said, but for this original and innovative approach. This is the main, or the major thing. So I will put on the floor two main questions for you both, and you can refer to these questions as you wish, and then Ricard will close a little bit with some reflections about what has been asked and what is really to close a little bit. And also for you, if you want to intervene, you just raise your hand, and I will take, and after the interventions, you can, if you want to ask something. So, Carmen, when you, because it's very strange, to talk about activism, talking about migrations. Perhaps you provide us an idea about what it's about. But why did you choose this topic, talking about migrations in Mediterranean? And what do you think is the added value of your chapter in this book? And finally, and this is a compulsory question to be answered, why they need to read this book? What is the interest for this research or these young students to read not all the book, but some part, or in a special
chapter?
No, but in particular.
Okay.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you so much for having me speak today, and thank you to Ricard for creating a safe space for me in GRITIM, and also Gemma and IEMed. I didn't think when I left Lebanon that I would love Barcelona this much and be able to find my voice again. When I wrote this chapter, This was the saddest chapter I've written my whole life. Like I submitted a chapter for the book. I remember like arriving to Barcelona May 2022. We had a deadline, and I remember just like crying, like reading those transcripts of people that had left. And it was a very sad chapter for me to write. I'm also a scholar of international relations. They don't teach us to deal with civil society, trauma, burnout. I mean, these are not words that would be published in a political science journal. So I attest to everything that has been said about you, Ricard, for being original, innovative, and for be willing to cast such a wide net as to what are the concepts and what would constitute that, right? Because it's not a chapter on institutions, but it's a very nice chapter. You should read it. It's a bit sad, but you should read it and download the book also. It's for free, and it's 400 pages. So just briefly, this is a chapter that's become part of a larger project that basically looks at the subset of displaced people in a broad sense, people that are in exile, self-exile, or refugees that come from the Arab region and decide to settle in different Mediterranean cities. It's a chapter that documents the experiences of, broadly speaking, democracy and gender activists following disappointments in social movements, because in mainstream political science and IR, we look at uprisings, regime change, regime failure, institutions, social movements, but we do very little to study the individual as a unit of analysis, and that was what I tried to do. And the individual as a unit of analysis, a year and a half ago, at least for the Lebanon case, was reporting things like deliberately wanting to settle close enough to be in Lebanon, but also purposefully needing to cut ties physically in order to survive the aftermaths, I think, of what happened in Lebanon that included the explosion, the economic collapse, and everything that followed. But since then, I've changed my mind a little bit, because I've also been speaking to activists that are not just from Lebanon, but Syria, Libya, Iraq, that have had a longer time. They've immigrated much more than the Lebanese and my generation. And I've been noticing more patterns of defiance and more transnational elements that are born out of their experience in Mediterranean countries, and particularly Greece and Barcelona and Istanbul. And I want to talk about Barcelona as being a safe haven, I think, Gemma, not just for Arab activists, because I have colleagues in North America and Northern Europe, and now with what is happening in academic institutions, everybody wants to come to Barcelona. Because, and I'm not saying this to make an advertisement like the book, but for me it has been very easy to find my voice again. And Sari knows, because we have been shoulder to shoulder for so many years under so much blood and sweat and glass trying to build something. I didn't think genuinely that I would find a parallel universe where I could still do work on Lebanon, but also broaden the conversation. And I think that Mediterranean migration thinking in that respect would expand the outreach also for this kind of conversation, because also Colombian women in Catalonia have had a very long time and a very important struggle in documenting their own history and truth and reconciliation that can be very helpful, I think, for the younger Arab migrants. So respect to Barcelona, to the book as well. And I'll just close with just a couple of ideas around conceptually taking the individual as a unit of analysis in the Mediterranean. A lot of the training that we do in academia does not prepare us to talk about things like trauma, fatigue, and burnout. And I think that the book for me was a seed in order to expand that thinking. And the last thing I want to say, when people leave immediately, there's also a loss of a kind of political consciousness and a political identity, particularly people that have been involved in long-term struggle in their countries. I'm talking about people that started shelters for women where it was not allowed, worked on LGBTQ issues, worked on reproductive health, set up new courses on universities, people that have had that much political experience in countries that have experienced disappointment, that move here or move to the other side of the Mediterranean, bring with them a lot of epistemic privilege, a lot of lived experience that can be helpful also for the countries that are hosting them. That's all I'll say about the chapter. It is very interesting. And I think one of the things to charter as we move forward is a med thinking that would also look at displacement, 1.9 million people in Gaza in 3 months. That's also migration, and that's also Mediterranean. How are we ever going to wrap our heads around this? So just moving forward, I'm grateful again for the space. I look forward to the engagement. And download the book.
You can feel this innovative approach, you can feel this feeling approach that the authors we are and this. And I think you are underlining something super interesting also, that is the momentum where the book has been elaborated, with this confusion, if I may say, about refugees, about immigration, about intercultural integration, externalization of migration policies. I think, but this is a question, no? But I think also the momentum where the book has been collected, all the contributions, was a momentum of, I don't know, confusion in the way that we can approach all this on these regards. So the need of this this way to work in a transdisciplinary way, I don't know if it's the word. So there is a need of spaces where you can mix some considerations on this, no? And also, when you read this book, it's also, if I may say, a song of the circumstances that we are living in this context now. So it's providing migration within a space that perhaps is much more free, and perhaps is a first phase of something that should be done in this net thinking that is a proposal that is not still is not there, but it's a proposal.
No pressure, but you have a lot of work still, Ricard. So this is a precedent. It's great, but I agree. It captures a moment in time, both disciplinary, politically, and empirically, that creates a precedent.
Yeah. I could realize also this by studying or approaching these local and regional movements that make, and this is one of the main findings of my empirical research about this, that all this split of the cities in the European cities working in these networks in favor of solidarity, and this is something that Ricard is now working on in a more deep stage, but I could realize how, after the refugee crisis, all these networks of cities mainly, and also regional networks, because this is interesting at a local and regional level, they are fighting to say that this solidarity is also responsibility, that is not only solidarity for NGOs and responsibility for national politics. And this debate was there, still not resolved, a little bit, but it can be the photography also of a momentum that make these actors much more interesting, because they can prove that responsibility and solidarity are in the same path. So some similar things. So Lorenzo, your chapter is something for a Spanish researcher or for a Spanish citizen. Talking about Ceuta y Melilla is not evident. And you reach a point that this analysis you are providing in the book is necessary, if I may say, and also in the line that Ricard has been presented during the first approach, that is that we need this freedom space to also observe what is this role of in your case, this is really interesting. So explain to us how this innovative approach in your research, and also, again, why they need to read this book.
Thank you very much to all the intervention that precede me to open and so stimulating field. I'm not very good to do self-promotion, so I hope after my intervention you find some interest in my chapter and more largely in the book. I pay tribute for start to my co-author, Xavier Ferrer Gallardo, a geographer that's not here. Cannot be here tonight. We work often together. Coming from political science, is coming from geography, so together we work on political geography, basically, with a very comprehensive and complementary view. And our chapter is dedicated to the case of Ceuta and Melilla, these two very little enclaves in the north of Africa, under Spanish authority. And we look basically at the evolution of border regimes from 1986 until now. But beyond the empirical cases, I think that these two little enclaves are quite relevant for several reasons. I think symbolically, they are a good representation of the fortress Europe, but also of the paradigms of global dynamics nowadays, so the immobility of some flow versus the immobility of some other flows. In southern Melilla, their iconic fences that probably all of you know are the symbol at the same time of the EU harshness toward human movement from the global south, from the periphery or the semi-periphery, from the country that need a visa to enter in the European Union. I don't know how to define it. But it's also, I think, a very interesting analytical prism to study mobility and at the same time immobility. We often look at mobility, but immobility is also part of the same coin. In the Mediterranean, but I think a little bit beyond, because Euro-African space converge in the Mediterranean, and the Mediterranean is linked also to the north and the south of the two continents, or the three continents that connect. Southern Melilla are a forerunner and also a precursor of anti-immigration and securitization turn in Europe. They are a precursor of proliferation of walls and fences. They are a symbol, in some sense, of racial apartheid and of what can be defined as a global war on migrants. I mentioned before the number of dead people in the Euro-African space and in the Mediterranean. It can be considered a low-intensity war, but at the end, still a war, both for the consequences and for the tools put in place to produce immobility or to control mobility. Is also a manifestation of exceptionality or exceptionalism at the Euro-African border, the socio-spatial one in more geographical term, but also the legal and political one, this space where the states act and where the rights of the people are not defended or are not present. Is also a manifestation of what we can call enforcement archipelago, and is also a very clear case to look at paradoxes of border policies. It's a space where at the same time some flows are strictly controlled. It's probably one of the most controlled border in the planet, but at the same time daily crossing are not counted, and just evaluation or estimation are available. Is a space where we look at crossing, very quick crossing and normal crossing of products, for example, and some kind of people, but while other flows are not crossing freely. There's a space of exceptionality versus what is finally a permanent crisis, a crisis that's there since decades and tasked to be considered a structural element, not just of mobility in Ceuta and Melilla, but in the entire Mediterranean. We need to escape to this logic of crisis and emergency and consider mobility both in formal, through formal channel and informal channel as a structural element of the Mediterranean, and the historical one. Is a space where violence, arbitrarity, and impunity are very present, and is also a space to study paradoxes crossing migration policies as national, bilateral, and multilateral level. It's also a space to look at autonomy of migration, so the action of migrant and their strategy of subversion of sovereignty, to use the words of a previous intervention. And finally, is a space to look at geopolitical interaction and tension, as well as externalization and its externalities. And I want to conclude with some comments on pressing research topics and challenges to look at migration in the Mediterranean. The first one, in my view, is to escape from this structure of this constant crisis and emergency-based perception of the Mediterranean, and to consider migration and human mobility as a structural element. The second one is evaluating the need of evaluating result of policies beyond border spectacle-based policies. There is also a need to go more in the direction of evidence-based migration policies versus these policies based on the stomach, on populistic narrative, on xenophobic narrative, or the border spectacle. And I think there is a need in this sense, and related to the border spectacle, to go beyond the structural racism of European society and its translation in international hierarchies and geopolitical actions. And this is related to the challenges. Some have been commented before, the issue of funding and the political constraint towards defining the research agenda, basically, and which interest it has. The difficulties to find funding for establishing long-term cooperation and networks in the Mediterranean space beyond the European focus. And I think, and to establish in this sense a real, very utopic Mediterranean identity, including European, or at least South European countries that don't need to add the suffix Euro-Mediterranean to Mediterranean, because European one will be included. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, because this is really this. You finalize with a very good resume where we are at that moment. You are in a European for Mediterranean Studies Institute, and we are always looking to break this Euromed and to go to the Mediterranean. This is why we try to make this evidence researching and this analysis and this, but this is not easy, no. Please, do you have something to ask to our panelists? Oh, very good. Pues un momento que... Mira aquí, ya bien. Y aquí. Muy bien. Un momento que... Es que they need to record.
I'm going to study, so maybe...
Sorry?
I'm going to study, so maybe it's not maybe.
No, yes, because it's recorded. And...
It's recorded.
Yes, and someone after wants to see the YouTube, they cannot listen to you. Go ahead.
Well, more than a question, it's just a reflection on what you mentioned about cultural affinity, and I'm interested in knowing your reflections on my reflection. So it's very interesting to see the different ways in which solidarity operates, and it's very refreshing to hear your comments on how the European societies are acted differently to the conflict happening in continental Europe versus what happened in the Mediterranean, in Syria. But I think that rather than cultural affinity, is a sense of belonging that has been created. Because at least in Spain, apart from entering the European Union as an institution, I feel that in the last decades there has been a lot of emphasis on belonging to the European community and being European. But that Mediterranean identity that you mentioned, I think it's been left behind. And even though, spatially speaking, it's happening just as far away, we don't feel that reality is as close in our imaginary. So,
Okay, thank you. After we will give you the floors. And I think they are in there. So.
So I'll ask. Yeah, right, sorry. No, just like when you were like talking about this right now. First of all, I'm Muhannad. I'm from Syria as well, and I'm a master's student here for international relation. While talking about this, I was like also like trying to think globally. I would say, like considering what's happening right now, like Ukraine-Russia war. I think we also, maybe I hope, or like I'm wondering if like this shift now of the European countries towards the Northern Africa right now for natural resources, do you think this is gonna like, in a way, intensify or like make the policymakers in Europe to push more into like investing more money maybe in academia and like activities, whatever it is, to intensify or improve this relationship, or like to work on the Mediterranean as a whole, like us, like maybe it's a chance right now, maybe. And that's it. Thank you.
Very good question. Anyone? Yes.
Thank you for your presentations. I have a question for Carmen. I completely agree with you in the sense of I don't feel we as researchers are trained to study trauma. So I would like for you to maybe give us a piece of advice on like how to approach trauma from a methodological perspective, and also if you can elaborate a little bit more on what is the responsibility of the researcher as a witness of someone's suffering and grieving, and also what is the role of care and the interaction and relationship between the researcher and the participants.
Good. Someone? No? Well, we will take like this. So can we start perhaps with the question, no, regarding the sense of belonging? Can you pass the microphone?
The micro.
The microphone, yes. Venga, one last.
Okay.
Very last.
So this is for Ricard. On the last chapter, you say that any research on Mediterranean migration necessarily becomes critical, quasi-activist, so against the dominant narrative world. So I was wondering if this is like inherently in the research in Mediterranean migration, or do researchers have to make like a conscious effort to go against the dominant narrative, well, in your opinion? Thank you.
Actually, I talk about that to show how important the political imaginary beyond nation-state imaginary. And when we talk about this political imaginary, where you have belonging, as you said, even allegiances. I mean, how I feel I have allegiance to Marxism, for instance, while I am I'm Marxist leader. So Gramsci, for instance, to claim it as a hero, or to claim for the Shia, for instance, that one of the supreme leader in Iran is I have allegiance to him. I mean, all my work is to show that there is no contradictions, and we should admit that culture count and this historical ties and relationship count. You bring the question of proximity. I mean, may count, but I think it's more how a cultural sphere has been defined is very important. Actually, it is very interesting in the book, many examples how relationship between Latin America and Spain, because many of these Latino, they have ancestors here. So all this should be factors when we reflect on such a relationship. This is and not to. All my work is a criticism of French republicanism. I mean, and how they, if you like, how they denounce the French Muslims, for instance, that they have they behave not fully like what is a French culture, etc., etc. And this is very important, and especially for understand migration.
Thank you. Now I will take advantage of you for the question on Ukraine and Russia. So can you just provide us an insight? Do you think that, no, if I can repeat, that all these conflicts, whatever, will be useful to reinforce, no, all the Mediterranean research.
Oh, the students' question.
Yeah,
oh,
you
was
can
it for me?
help us because we have so many questions. So
Yes, I'll give you, of course, I'll give you my cynical neorealist take as you're an IR student, and then I'll let Ricard perhaps give a more...
after Ricard has your question.
a more helpful. I'm a bit less optimistic in terms of this because one of my recent projects looks at aid towards North African countries and where aid is going in terms of migration. And unfortunately, there is research that highlights how this money goes less into long-term projects about improvement and more into projects about containment, securitization. So I'm sorry I'm not giving you the answer that you may have hoped for, but I think we're at a very interesting time in terms of the European Union itself, in terms of whether there is any leadership. And I'm curious as a Syrian whether you see it or not, because as a Greek I perceive it. I remember back in the day, there was a vision, right? There was the Union for the Mediterranean. There were people that wanted to do something like this. We no longer have them. So it's become technocratic, but even worse so perhaps securitized technocracy, if you know what I mean. So I'm a bit less optimistic. So that's why I was a bit hesitant to answer this question, but hopefully somebody can give you a more optimistic take.
No.
Yes.
Like about the gas as well.
Yes.
So now we can see like now more of interdependency.
Correct.
Or dependency from Europe on the other African
Correct.
countries.
Correct.
So maybe now this is going to push, because most of the policymakers, they are materialistic, right?
Yes.
They already care pragmatic. They
Yes.
care about that. But now this is going to push them in a way to invest more because they're going to need Algeria, they're going to need Morocco, they're going to need these countries from now on. It's not like before. Now there's more dependency on them. So maybe, like what I'm not saying, maybe like from there, they're going to be something.
Do you see that happening from that side? Because somebody needs to lobby for this, right? Do you think Tunisian elites or Moroccan elites are lobbying for long-term projects about education or social rights? Or do they care about something else? Because so somebody needs to support this in a way. You know what I mean?
We are organizing in February, jointly with our masters, the Aula Mediterraneum, a session, an old session about researching Mediterranean. And we are doing this in collaboration with the Union for the Mediterranean. No way, researching the Mediterranean for the Union for the Mediterranean, it's about something. But so we, as IEMed, we are pushing and lobbying for doing the other research. So we organize something where the two languages will be present. Why? Because if we avoid this one and we go only for our researchers on social issues, migration, Arab, whatever realities, we will not touch or we will not have incidents. But they are not researching our Mediterranean. You know what I mean? This is the reality. But it doesn't mean that we cannot lobby and doing things. So this is a space for lobby and having an incidence. And the space is here. So we need to do this because it's not, I agree with you, this is not the path, this is not the path.
Needs to lobby. We ask students, that's
Yeah, this is what we will try. Well, thank you. This is a debate, but we will invite all of you in this other debate. So, Carmen, you have a question.
Yes, briefly on trauma. So first, I haven't figured it out yet because I'm new to this, but let me introduce, first of all, a little bit my identity as a researcher. So I'm researching people that are like me, that are peers, that know me. All of the work that I've published previously and I'm working on now have been wrapped around a political project of some sort. So this research I'm doing is about solidarity for many of us that were forced to leave, chose to leave. There is a spectrum who feel a sense of isolation. At the same time, it's not a guidebook because trauma is multifaceted and it depends where you look at it. There is the effect on the researcher, right? Imagine you're asking people how they feel about a decision, about a project, and all their answers is, I feel heartbroken, I'm sad, they start crying. You're not trained as a researcher. There is the influence on the researched because you don't want to interrupt someone. Migrants are busy, refugees are busy. They're under piles of paperwork and a ton of administrative things to deal with. That is, if they're legal, you don't want to take 2 hours of their day and cause them to cry and then leave them alone. So there is the effect of trauma on people that are being researched. And then there's the influence of this conversation of burnout and mental health on the discipline itself. So say your results are all about that. How do you factor in that in IR or social movements or migration? My way to kind of not go around this, but I'm doing it as a political project. And all of the research that I've done, I've had a stake in them. I have cared about the outcome, and I've wrapped around writing and books and articles on real projects. Now, you can call that activism in academia, engaged scholarship, or you can call me a charlatan or a public intellectual, whatever, but it has never been about extracting data. And so with this research in particular on democracy activists experiencing a great sense of disappointment, the invitation has been, can we think together of a social solidarity network with me in Barcelona as sort of leading this, how can we be less lonely and think about this together, and also which we want to document our own narratives for this, and people have been very open to talking about this. And just a last logistics thing is self-care also. So if you're doing research on sad, difficult situations, you want to also take a breath, acknowledge that we're not trained as social psychologists. And the last tip I have, you can team up with psychologists. So for the data for this study, I share a lot of the transcripts with doctors Charlotte Karam and Lina Dao, because they are organizational psychologists. They're trained in the individual as a unit of analysis, something that you don't learn in IR. So you can also team with people in psychology, social psychology, to kind of bring that into med thinking and into mainstream political science research on the region.
Thank you, Carmen. And before giving the floor to Ricard for the key questions and to close a little bit of this reflection, Lorenzo, can we help him in this nice question about the sense of this exercise in the book? Do you consider that is a radical aim in the sense that I think was very well pointed by him? When you look at all these collaborations and all this, do you feel that, and your article about yourself, it is an intention of change things and to have a radical impact, or is just a compendium of a path that we are doing on the research?
Personally speaking, that's easier to speak from my point of view. Personally, I think that everything's political. choosing to work on a topic or another one is a political choice, a part of an academic choice. The main point for an academic is considering that's not in contrast with rigor and objectivity in analyzing data. So in this sense, I think that every artifact is a political, and every artifact in some sense has a goal in order to change reality in one direction or another one.
Okay, clear. So Ricard, you can answer the rest of the questions.
The floor to Lorenzo and leave it. In any case, my first thought go to Professor Awad, that is not there, but the book is a product of us, of both, because we have had a conversation together and we have been speaking about categorization, and I remember myself speaking with him, I don't agree with this perspective, I don't agree with this perspective, or how can we This was very interesting and very productive, and I remember that we have to leave the global south and global, and I am unhappy with that. But I am unhappy with whatever categorization, because categorization is always power relations, is always inequality, is always ideology. Students know that from me, because this is my obsession, and how we categorize and how we problematize. Problematization also, to build a problem is an ideological issue. To build a problem is also a power relation. Europe build problems and make invisible some other problems that are visible from other perspectives. And then, and then from this point of view, I think the first thing is that there are not easy questions on that, and there are not easy answers. This is my conclusion at the end. But I would say that the conversation of this book, this book is a conversation between, it is IEMed philosophy behind. That means to put together that there is not a center of how to build problems, but the building of problem need to be done through a conversation between disciplines, between geographies, between a scale of analysis, and I also will say to put together history and space together. Ceuta and Melilla has been done also incorporating temporality, which is maybe the most innovative issue in the chapter. This is always the result of history. Problems are also a result of history. And then I will think that the book is a conversation of all of things. And Mediterranean migration is the frame. I agree. The effort to put in conversation Mediterranean migration has been it's belonged to the IEMed philosophy, but it is also, I would say, there have been some conversation about that, the role of the researcher. The role of the researcher is not to reproduce status quo. That's definitively not our role. The role of the researcher is to look after, to put in conversation the status quo with alternative ways of. I will say myself, I am a bit Bourdieu and Foucault at the same time. It's power and inequality together. And I would say that this book is also, and I think is shared by all the contributors. We have seen that too here, that the effort is also to try to do this epistemological claim that knowledge production is also ideological. Knowledge production is also related to power and inequalities, and all responsibility, I will say, is to try to create this kind, I like this word, this kind of space of co-production of knowledge between different space, different geographies, and so on. And the book is nothing more than this, to take seriously, I will say, this pluralism of views on Mediterranean migration. And of course also to, in most of our conversation, we had several conversation through a virtual conversation and also some seminars and so on. And my insistence also was to be innovative, to go beyond the edge of what we know about that, and also what Foucault say, to give voice to those that are marginalized in this term. And then from research, there are many margins that we need to go there. And then this book also is to speak about activism, is to speak about Ceuta and Melilla from a different way, to incorporate the cities and the networks and so on, and to speak about the Mediterranean as a category of analysis. But when I say Mediterranean as a category of analysis, I am saying that as a category is a hierarchy, is power relations, and is inequalities, and to deal with this kind of issues also. I will say that that's all. There are two ways to approach power, I will say. Power is, you may want power, because power is a powerful, I would say, situation. You can decide, but the most important is to influence power. I am in this position. I prefer to influence power than to have power. That's all. And researchers have this responsibility to influence power and to make power the power of transformation influence this power of transformation. I think this is our responsibility, and as a researchers, and this book, I think, try to channel all these variables together, and we have been just lucky that most of the authors that contribute in this book share, I think so, this kind of philosophy and behind that, and this has been the product of this choral product of multiple voices together and so on. And most of the time with Ibrahim Awad, which is the co-author from American University of El Cairo, we put together our networks. Invite this one, but we realized together that we were much more inviting people than topics, because these people, we know these people, how they work, we know how innovative they want to work together and so on. And then I think this is why, just to answer Gemma, that we invite people, and that people have to say, and the knowledge that is produced through practice. You were in the external affairs in Catalonia government, then that's a very good situation to produce knowledge and to produce this kind of things. And then I think that I have nothing more to say that going beyond the age of knowledge is what's put together and to build these Mediterranean migration studies. This is the effort that we have done. This is the first product. I hope this will be not the last one. We have done also product on cities and on a symposium that we organize there. But this has been much more, I will say, policy oriented. And last that we have been speaking about budget, financing Europe, how Europe may also condition some of the research. I remember myself to have this conversation with Jean Monnet. We take the keywords of the, and we were unhappy with much of the keywords: security, protection, border control, this kind of thing, and so on. But researchers are also able to seduce Europe in this case, and to use a concept in a different ways. And I remember myself that at the last modification of the project, when we get it, was because I was speaking about Mediterranean migration, but we decide, in spite of, but we decide to speak about Euromed, because it was Europe that gave you the money. But at the end, the product of the book, we don't speak about Euromed, even if it has been done with Euromed money. I will say, at the end, we try also, but I am myself very, very surprised is how Europe shape the narrative of project. Wow, it's awful. It's simply awful, because but we can manage to convince, okay, give me money to do that, and at the end I will do this book, even if this book is against Eurocentrism. But this is possible. This is what we can do as a researchers. But I think it's really awful what is happening in Europe today with most of the projects that and the narrative of project. There is something to be done there to analyze the narrative of project of Europe. That's amazing. That's amazing what they are requesting. Sorry for that.
Because but because the translator says, but just a warning. You can do all these, but with quality and with rigor and to be. This is the principle. If not, it doesn't work. I can assure you. You cannot make this change if there is not a big research and a big quality. And I think this is what the GRI team team and the leadership of Ricard is doing and with all these researchers and with all these efforts. So thank you for your patience. We promise you that next time will be all the day symposia, but today we need to do this in this way. Thank you very much and enjoy.
Bueno, moltes gràcies per venir. Bueno, ha sigut agradable, no? Estava una mica... A veure si busquem més d'espai.